to India and Ireland, round Africa and back again. We don't really need to know just where we'll go. Maybe Canada, then to Brazil, then through the Alpine foothills. All I really want to know is, can we go? Oh baby, can we go? Round and around the globe.
Welcome to Take Me With You, episode 47. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Cheryl. We are two well-traveled people who want to go everywhere.
But that's not going to happen. So instead, we'll travel vicariously by inviting a guest to share their unique travel stories with us.
Today we're talking to Michelle. Michelle is an English teacher and a dance coach in Seattle. One of Ryan's co-workers, actually.
Yeah.
So, yay! Welcome, Michelle!
Thank you for having me.
We're excited to have you. I hope you have all the dirt on how Ryan is as a coworker, and
Oh boy.
I don't know what that dirt would be or anything, but I want the hot goss.
So that's the real reason I'm on. Okay, all right.
Yep, here we go. We're going to dish about Ryan. I already heard off air that you teach a podcasting class, but you have never been on a podcast before?
This is correct. While I had a cameo in a student's podcast, that was pretty much my extent to being on a podcast. But yes, they have to read a book of their choice and then talk about it, of how it connects to social issues in the real world. So they had a fun time with it.
Interesting. I mean, that sounds like a good podcast, actually. So that's cool.
Our Handmaid's Tale podcast was very interesting.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Oh, yikes. Oh, very cool. That's great. So you have just lived in this area for a year, you said?
That is correct. Yeah, I moved out here from Chicago last July. So
Okay.
officially just
And did you grow up in Chicago?
Suburbs of, and then I lived in this city for about 6 years, and then that's when I came out here with my husband. It was his job that moved us, but he does not work for any of the tech companies, as everyone assumes. They're like, but yeah, and then I was able to get my job at LDub, so here for now.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. So what did travel look like living in the Chicago area for you?
Oh, well, it was not as, all my travel would be outside of the state typically. Like when I was just out of college, because of affordability, I would do a lot of road trips. And so we moved around that way. And then once we could afford it, it was just, let's go to all of the craziest places we can go because we're young and we can. But what's kind of cool is living out here, it's like, oh, let me literally drive 15 minutes to a mountain. And so my travel has changed dramatically because I feel like I'm getting that exotic experience without really having to go really far.
That's fun.
Mm-hmm.
So that's your version of when we think about oh my gosh, if I lived in Europe, I could go to other countries for so cheap. And you're like, I live in Seattle and I get to go to the mountains for so cheap.
It is awesome. Yes, that's exact. I feel like I'm on a never-ending vacation, which I probably shouldn't say too much to my family at home, but living out here I didn't realize I needed this in my life, but I'm like, I don't want to go back, but we'll see.
Wow, well, you are ready to work for Seattle tourism. Congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you.
And I mean, I'm totally fine. You can stay at LDub. We'll keep you. So.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that's good because Ryan's picky, so that's quite a compliment.
No,
I'm sure that she's picked up on that already. That's not a big secret. So, Michelle, we've got a set of questions that we tend to like all of our guests. So, first of all, why do you travel?
It's actually started when I was young. I was very lucky and privileged to be able to travel a lot with my family. And so I think my father instilled that in us of, don't be settled with the bubble and don't live in a bubble for the rest of your life. Get out of it as soon as you can. And so once I was traveling with them, I knew I never wanted to stop and I wanted to go to places they never would go. So I think the balls just kept on rolling, and I've dragged my husband with me because he'd only been to Mexico once in his life, and the first trip I took like him with, besides the road trips, was Thailand. He's like, I'm never going there. It took me 3 years to convince him to go. And then once we eventually went, now he wants to go everywhere too. So I've used peer pressure to bring him with me on my travels, and it's worked.
Oh, man. And did your dad use the phrase, the bubble?
I think that's a common phrase where I grew up. I grew up in a suburb right outside of Naperville, and the term is the Naperville bubble. And so if people don't leave it, they have a certain mentality on life that I didn't necessarily want to have. It's one of, just entitlement. And so I think my dad, knowing that we were going to be going to those schools, tried very hard to make sure we didn't have that mentality. So I'm very thankful for that.
That's very cool.
The type of traveling that you did with your dad, was that mostly in the U.S. or was that international travel?
It was international travel. So they tried to... We would try to do, when we were younger, we would go on road trips to the Ozarks. And so we would be going to Bull Shoals Lake, Table Rock Lake, and that was when we were younger, and it was an easy trip for families because we went with neighbors. But then once we got to a certain age, when I was a freshman, we went to Europe, and we did Italy and France. And then when I was a little bit older, we did Costa Rica, and we literally went from one side of the country to the other. Jamaica, we did Mexico. They tried to take us, Canada, we went to Whistler. So they tried to get us to as many countries as we could. We had a little scratch off map. It was cool. Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
That's fun.
But thinking about that in terms of like trying to raise kids who weren't entitled, like what did that travel look like then?
I feel like there was always a day or 2 days where we would not be stuck in a hotel, if that makes sense. So it was like, no, we're going to go to the town and we're just going to walk around and see where it takes us, or we're going to leave the resort and we're going to go have dinner like the locals would go to have dinner and find a recommendation. So that way we weren't just going and getting, virgin pina coladas at a swim up bar and be like, oh, this is what Costa Rica is. It's amazing. So we, like, for example, in Costa Rica, when we went, one of our hotels that we stayed at, and now looking back, even though he's trying his darnest to make us less entitled, I remember being terrified because we were going to this specific hotel because it was going to be the one that was closest to a tour that we were going to do the next day, a zip lining tour. The hotel was completely surrounded by a chain link fence. That was super tall. And then on the way that we walked in to the hotel, guys just casually walking down the street with machete. Well, my ignorant mind at the time didn't understand what the functional use of machete in that culture would be. And so here I'm just like, oh my God, we're gonna die. And so, of course, my parents were like, you're fine. We're going out to dinner. And I was so ignorant that I sat in the hotel all night and didn't eat dinner. They're like, okay, well, we're going to go enjoy ourselves. And so they left. But I think that was important. I think that was important that they did that to kind of be like, you're being ridiculous and we're going to show you you're being ridiculous and let you sit on this bed by yourself in this hotel while we enjoy a nice meal. So, yeah.
The next question comes kind of out of, like where you were in the past for travel, what you grew up learning about travel. So how would you describe the type of traveler you are now?
I think now I'm very itinerary based. I want to make sure that I get the most out of the experience that I can. Because to me, I sometimes vision like this might be my only chance to experience this country and this culture. And so that's why I kind of typically jam pack my trips, which can also have its downside. But I've also learned, and it was thanks to a trip to Iceland, to just kind of sit back and like take things one step at a time. And so now I like every place we go, I look for the free walking tour. And that way I can get acclimated. I can talk to a local and then, kind of just learn about what makes that city tick, and then I usually go from there. So I leave some open spots in my itinerary that I know I'll never be able to fully let go for the stuff that I learn about on the walking tours. Yeah.
I can relate so much to what you're saying. Yeah,
Yes.
That sounds a lot like me, where I've made myself sick on some trips because I've gone so hard. But I'm like, this might be my only chance. I have to do all the things. And then it's also like, but am I enjoying the things because I'm trying to do all the things? And so it's a tough balance to hit. Yeah.
Totally. Well, and it's because I saw my father. He would have his travel folder, and he'd have all the things set up with everything we're doing hour by hour. And like the first trip I took Chris on, I had my travel folder. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm becoming Fred. Like I was doing things exactly how he did it, but they were successful. So that's why
There's a reason
he had
for
a
that.
system.
So Michelle, what is your number one travel tip?
Honestly, as of now, I feel redundant, but it is the walking tour. I feel that the walking tours have given me insight into the cities that I go to more so than a blog or a book ever can. Like, yes, you usually get the skimmed over version, but I just love it. And I feel like, of course, the individuals that take on that job are just so interesting individuals. They're so funny and witty that I just love the interaction that comes with them as well. And it makes you feel comfortable. I'm directionally challenged. I get lost everywhere. And so sometimes like walking around with a person that knows their way around, that can be like, oh, I remember when we passed that, earlier this morning. And it just makes me feel safer, and then I'm more likely to try other things while I'm there.
So the walking tour that you said the free walking tour. So is that like usually through like the tourist information centers in the cities? Is that usually how you find them? Or
yeah, I usually, because I'm obsessed with Lonely Planet, I usually get their travel books a lot. And that's how I found out about the one in Iceland. But now I've just typically just Googled free walking tour and then insert city. And now there's multitudes of types of walking tours out there. And so then I look at the reviews. I see how big the groups are. So when my husband and I were in Kyoto, the group was so massive. Like, even though it was very interesting information, half the time I couldn't hear the tour guide just because it was like a group of like 35 to 40 people. And so that's one thing I would look into the smaller, more intimate, if you will, walking tours. But yeah, I feel I enjoy my experience when I do those. And I always do them at the start of the vacation to get acclimated, so they kind of set the tone of the rest of the trip.
Yeah. Have you ever done one of the like audio ones where it's like self-guided walking tour as opposed to a tour guide?
I haven't. I almost did in Boston when I was walking the Freedom Trail, because I knew that there was like different audio things that you can do along that with like the QR code on your phone. But that's one thing I haven't ventured into.
Yeah,
Okay.
so those can be cool. Ryan and I are fans of Rick Steves, and he has some through his app that are free audio tours. And yeah, I'm sure there's much more like that. And so, yeah, those can be another fun way if you're like, the group's too big. I'm not really into this, but I still want to go on it. And they give you good directions. I'm also directionally challenged, so I definitely resonate with what you're saying with that. And so it's nice because they're like, turn here at this statue. And I'm like, cool, there it is.
Exactly. I need my landmarks, and then I'm oriented.
Yes. Streets mean
Awesome.
nothing.
Cool. All right. So Michelle, what trip are you going to be telling us about today?
I'm going to talk about my trip to Thailand that I went to, I want to say when I was like 23. So it's a few years back at this point in time. But yeah, it was my first trip that outside of it was my first trip to Southeast Asia, but like to literally past Europe. So it was the furthest I'd ever gone from home, if you will. So it was a big deal.
So what made you choose Thailand then?
It was for two reasons. One, it just was a place that I'd always wanted to go to. I've always loved the food. And it was happened just to be cheap once you get there. The only expensive thing was the flight. And I think I was only in my second year of teaching at the time. So I was like, I can't afford, going to Greece, which is still on my bucket list. That was another thing. And the third thing was we had friends that lived there. One of girls that was in my sorority was living there. And then her boyfriend actually moved, at the time, her boyfriend moved out there and lived with her too. So it was even cheaper because when we were in Bangkok, we were staying with friends.
That's very cool. And who did you go with?
I went with my now husband, but he was my boyfriend at the time.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
And so you're saying that was your first international trip together?
Oh, yes. Before that, we had just done road trips. So that was like our first big trip together.
Oh, wow. So what did you learn and what did he learn about his travel style on this trip?
We both learned that when he gets uncomfortable and stressed, he might not be the best travel partner. But I think a lot of it was just because he likes being in control of the surrounding, knowing what's going to happen. And I think the biggest thing for him was the language barrier. So, and of course, we couldn't afford international plans. So we were taking screenshots of addresses, screenshots of Google Map directions so that we had the pictures on our phone. And unfortunately, that year that we went, there was a huge snowstorm in Chicago, which now is just the norm. But it was so bad that we were stuck in the airport for over 9 hours in delays. And so because of that, my beautiful itinerary that I put together didn't work because we were supposed to get a transfer flight to Chiang Mai immediately, and then we were going to stay overnight with the hill tribe. I had all of these amazing cool experience planned, and it didn't work out. So we had to make last minute changes, and then thus the stress started building, and I noticed him getting really, just frustrated and oh my gosh, why did I do this? I shouldn't have, jumped on board with this. This is why I don't do international travel. But luckily, since our friends lived in Bangkok, we just said, hey, heads up, we are definitely going to miss our flight. We're going to have to crash at your place tonight, even though you don't expect us until 5 days from now. And so they were super awesome and accommodating. And we hopped into a cab. And that's when I think I saw the first travel jitters that he had, is when we got into a cab and all we could do was show the picture of the address. And so when I'm stressed I just get quiet. I just shove that down. I just don't even talk about it. And I just look at my surroundings. And he's the opposite. He's vocal. He's very animated. So here's animated stress versus quiet, silent, just complete silence. Boy. In my mind, I'm just putting out the good vibes. I'm like, we're going to get there. It's fine. I trust this cab driver. Everything's okay. And sure enough, we got there and we made it and everything was all good. We were able to get a flight to Chiang Mai the next morning and, just kind of rolled with it. That is about the start.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
So help orient me because I'm not super familiar with Thailand geography. So you said you flew into Bangkok and then you had to fly to Chiang Mai. So how far apart are those cities?
If I remember correctly, it was I might choke on my words, but it was maybe 30 minutes to an hour flight. I could be wrong. It was so long ago, but it was northwest of Bangkok, I think, if my mental map is serving me correctly. And it was just going up to the rainforest. So we had, or the jungle, I guess you could say, but we had the choice. It's we're either going to go to the islands or we're going to go experience, the jungle. And we decided, since it was the Loy Krathong Festival, which is the Festival of Lights, that we wanted to see that experience and we wanted to be part of that festival. So that's what we did.
You got to see the Festival of Lights?
Yeah, it was beyond amazing.
Entangled?
Yeah, it's just Entangled. So many lanterns in the sky, so many candles, sitting on these beautiful flower leaf boats that are just floating down the canal. it was beyond. It was an absolute
Wow.
dream. Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. So I just looked it up, and yeah, it's just an hour flight between the two of them.
Okay.
But that would be in 9-hour drive. So
It's a decent separation.
Yeah, for sure. So okay, so you stayed in Bangkok briefly and then finally got your way to Chiang Mai.
Correct.
So tell us about Chiang Mai. What is it like?
Oh my gosh. So it's very walkable city. Everything, and that's another thing that Chris and I like to do, and I like to do, is if I can walk everywhere, I'm going to. I feel like I see cities best that way. And so we pretty much walked everywhere minus a couple places we took a tuk-tuk. Which was very interesting because luckily it all worked out that we stayed with our friends, because they taught us how to essentially haggle with the cab drivers and the tuk-tuk drivers.
Oh.
So explain what a tuk-tuk is.
It is basically like a motorcycle, but the back has the two wheels, and that's where the bench sits. And so the guy sits on his motorbike and you're behind it on a bench, and then there's typically a roof over you as well. And they're motorized, but usually, I mean, depending on the driver, as in with any cab and anywhere in the United States as well, they might give you a good rate. They might not put, because a tuk-tuk doesn't have a meter, so you're usually getting a flat rate or you negotiate. And so of course, negotiating with bot, you're doing the conversion in your head. And at times, we realized that the cab drivers wouldn't put their meters on. And so we'd have to essentially say, put the meter on, please. And then they wouldn't. And so then you'd have to get out and go to the next cab. Because, of course, they know you're a tourist and you have the money to afford it.
Yeah.
And so at times, we realized in the tuk-tuk, like it would be 70 baht to one location. And then on the way home, they'd be like 120 baht. And we're like, oh no, we're going to argue this down. And then we get back to our hotel and we're like, we just argued over 10 cents. Like, who are we? Because, of course, in that time, when you have the baht, you only have so much baht and there's only so many ATMs there. So that is your money. But then, of course, when you reflect on it, I'm like, I just looked like the biggest, I just look like such a mean American, because I'm just like, no, we're doing this much, and I'm refusing to give him like 10 cents or like a nickel. So that was very humbling and just kind of an interesting experience to haggle over what in the end wasn't a lot of money.
But is that the culture that, like, do the locals haggle over the price too?
Oh yeah. Well, and I think also it's just common.
So it wasn't really like disrespectful or anything.
I don't think it was but I think I felt the guilt of, like, when I did the conversion, how much I was trying to not pay. When in the end, like, no, I'll give you then. If I knew it at the time, I'd have been like, oh yeah, we'll pay that. It's no big deal. But when you only have so much dollars in your hands, you're like, oh no, that's our dinner tonight, or oh no, that's our tuk-tuk for tomorrow. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of that's interesting too is, and that's like your culture competing like internally with this culture that you're told like it's okay to haggle, it's not disrespectful, that's what people do, then it's like, well, then it's fine, and it and so, but then you're like, but I could have just paid them, and so that's an interesting moment to go through.
It was a constant back and forth for us with that.
That's interesting. So what else did you do? What did you do in Chiang Mai then?
So it was a lot of walking to temples and just looking at just the beautiful architecture and just trying to participate in that culture. And so, of course, things we learned that we read ahead of time to make sure we did. When you sit in a temple, you do not have the bottoms of your feet to the front of the temple, because that is a big show of disrespect. So you'd either sit Indian style, essentially with your feet tucked under you, or you sit, kind of down on your heels, because you can't have your shoes on. There was just one temple we saw that I wasn't allowed to go in, that Chris could, but it was like this tiny little structure. So of course Chris goes in it and laughs at me. He's like, haha, you're not allowed. I was like, really? Okay. But other than that, no, everything was open. Of course, there would be little areas that you could donate money if you wanted, but a lot of it was simply just to see the architecture of the temples. And then we would go down to the street fest where the Loy Krathong festival was happening. And so we paid for a lantern, and so we lit our lantern and set it up into the sky. We paid for the boat that was made out of the leaves and the flowers, and we set that in the river. And so we tried to partake into all of those festivities. But what was funny is during my planning, I guess you could say, I found this amazing hotel in Chiang Mai that was only $60 a night, and it was also a spa. So I was like, wow, what a steal. Like, $60 a night, that's amazing. And so as we were walking from our hotel, you know, downtown Chiang Mai, it's just on this beautiful street with a lot of shops, but they weren't open. So I was like, oh, we'll see them later. Well, sure enough, we walk back that evening and all of the shops are open and they're all bars. And then we start to kind of peruse inside each bar. And then we start to realize that I booked a hotel in the red light district. And so that was a nice surprise. And Chris is like, what are you doing? And so sure enough, he was getting propositioned at one of the bars that we went to. And it was very funny.
So you engaged in the culture.
We very much engaged in the culture, and we.
Oh my goodness!
I laughed at myself for not doing further research, but you know what? I got a steal, and that Thai massage at this spa was great. So I do not regret it one bit.
Oh my goodness! Oh, that's crazy when you book something and you're like, I don't know the area.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess this is cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
So a couple questions. One, so the temples that you went to, are they all part of the same belief system, or are there different temples for different belief systems?
That is a really good question. I feel majority of the ones that we went to were Buddhist. And if they weren't, I couldn't read the sign to know if it was of another denomination. So that's a really good question, though.
Okay. And then my second question is, do you know much about the Festival of Lights and what is it supposed to symbolize, and what's the difference between like the lantern and then the little boat thing? Like, do you know any of the background around those?
See, that's another thing, and this is why I wish I did more as a 23-year-old, because I think in my mind, I'm like, I'm going, and it's international travel, and I'm participating in these things, and I'm sure we read about it when we were there. It's like a new year, if I remember correctly, and Cheryl, you might have to fact check me on that, but I know because it's around the same time as the full moon party, which also takes place on the beaches down there. But the vibe of the full moon party is one that's like a rave, right? Like it's like this crazy celebration with people that go down and party from all these different countries, and they just come. And I'm like, that's not the cultural experience I want to experience. Like that, especially when there's more people from outside the country of Thailand coming to the full moon party than there is actually Thai people. And so when we were at this Loy Krathong festival, we felt like we were, of course, there's tons of tourists there, right? But to get a flight when our flight was canceled on us, we were spending a good amount of money, because it's a very popular festival to go to for all the locals or people that live outside, of course, of the city. But yeah, Cheryl might have to fact check me.
I'm checking it out. I'm not there yet. It's just, I'm reading a description of it, and it sounds gorgeous. Maybe Wikipedia will have the answers for me.
I hope.
Because we know it's always correct, yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like, I think the older I get, the more I want to know and I want to research where I'm going. And I think the only things I was researching at that time was just like, how do I not insult people? Like, how do I make sure I don't look like a dumb American? And
I mean, that's good too. That's a great place to start.
Yeah. And so that was like the main focus. And then of course it was seeing friends. But it was a rush trip. It was over Thanksgiving break. We were only there for 5 days because I didn't have enough sick days to take.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We would have been there for 7 if we didn't miss our flight, but it went down to, based on the time difference and everything, we were only actually there for 5 full days. So it was quick.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And was that worth it to go on an international trip for that short of time? Like, are you happy that you did that with that timing?
I am so happy. Like, I think once you're there, you're not thinking about the impending flight. You're very, because you're just so far away. It's so off in the distance. Of course, I was terrified I would lose my job because here I am, a non-tenured teacher taking emergency days to go to Thailand. But nobody in my district knew it at the time. I was sick, quote unquote.
You took sick days to do that?
Well, they were called emergency days in my old district, so it's like your personal days. So I took my 3.
okay.
So they couldn't technically ask me what those days were for.
Because it's a personal day.
But
yeah.
of course, now everybody that I worked with in Chicago knows I went to Thailand. It was kind of hard to like not talk about it, but it was going into it. So I was like, I'm going to keep this hush.
And you didn't get fired.
I didn't get fired. No.
So that's good.
Yeah, it was a great experience to talk to students about.
So all I'm finding is just that it's a full moon day is what it means. And so it's about the full moon. I'm sure there's more to it than that. But
right.
That's my initial internet results here.
Well, and sadly, that's all I knew at the time of that. It was correlated with the full moon festival, and that's it. But now I have homework to do.
I know, right? Yeah. Oh, man. Cool. And so then you went to Bangkok.
Yes. And so then we returned to Bangkok and spent the rest of our trip with our friends. And so the first day, our friend Ryan kind of gave us like the best itinerary possible. He's like, all right, you're going to do this. You're going to see that. You're going to do this. You're going to see that. Then you're going to take this little small alleyway and you're going to come up to a canal and you're going to get this beautiful, like it was to a T, like foolproof. Like if we didn't follow his directions, like we would have, I don't know where we would have ended up.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing this trip with us. So we have a couple questions for you, Michelle. So our first one is, if you could take us with you to just one thing on this whole trip, what would it be and why?
In Thailand, we flew northwest to Chiang Mai, and that's where we saw the Loy Krathong Festival. But before we enjoyed the festival, we actually did a elephant sanctuary where we were able to bathe the elephants and feed the elephants and then get Mahout certified. And so what was cool about that is that you learned the proper way to, I guess, ride an elephant like the Mahouts do in Thailand. So we basically had to wear this Canadian tuxedo uniform. The gentleman at the sanctuary said that made the elephants feel a little bit more comfortable because you looked like someone who worked there. And after we pampered the elephants with tons of bananas and scratches and literally a full-on bath in the river, we were able to learn how to ride them and essentially learn certain calls or cues in Thai to direct them left, right, and in a circle. And then we went on a very short ride around the camp, and it was cool because my husband Chris and I were just bareback on this elephant, which was one of the major things I said to my husband when we were planning that trip, because we saw a lot of elephant sanctuary trips. However, people were riding on those huge benches that were like strapped to these elephants, and to me that seemed cruel, and I wanted to pamper an elephant instead. So I highly recommend, if you look into elephant sanctuaries, I'd want you to come with me just to experience that awesome time with the animals. It was so great.
And Michelle, what's your next trip?
Our next trip is San Diego. We are deciding to do one last trip to celebrate, I mean my husband and I, our 2-year wedding anniversary. And the last time I was in San Diego, I was very young, so I'm excited just to experience it as an adult. And I got a lot of tips from one of my coworkers who used to live there. So the plan is to eat a lot of fish tacos, do an urban hike across a lot of the bridges there, go to Hotel Coronado and like sit on the beach and all of that stuff. So really excited to do a nice little city trip while we can.
Oh, good. That's awesome.
Wonderful.
And do you have any travel questions for us?
What is the next trip you guys are going to do? Where are you traveling next?
Ryan, do you know?
Go for it, Cheryl.
Well, Ryan's already done a lot of travel this year, but I'm curious if he knows where he's going next. Do you know where you're going next, Ryan?
I don't know for sure where I'm going.
Oh, wait, I just remembered.
But I have a tentative trip planned for February. So Michelle knows we have a funky midwinter break in my school district where most schools in the area get the entire week of President's Day off, and that's their midwinter break. Whereas my school district, we get the Thursday and Friday before President's Day and then Monday for President's Day off. And I have already put in to take the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday before that Thursday and Friday off because I am hoping to go to California to go to Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland. But I haven't bought any tickets yet. It's not for sure, so I don't know.
You're going.
That.
You're going, Ryan.
And I may end up down there a little bit before that. My sister is pregnant and is due in September, so I'm going to have another nephew in September. But I just don't know if I'm going to make it down there, just because it's like, can't really go down in September because of school starting and stuff, and it would be crazy for them because her husband's a teacher also, so it's already going to be kind of a high stress situation because of that. And so then like October, and then you're into November, and then that's the end of the quarter, and then there's Thanksgiving, and then it's like Christmas. So it's like, so it may just even be easier to wait until February. I don't know yet, but that's the one trip right now that is potentially my next trip.
You gotta go. I'm so excited.
Oh, I want to. What about for you, Cheryl?
I have a good next trip. So I'm going on my, I'm getting married and then going on my honeymoon in December. And we are going to Prague, Dresden, and Amsterdam. So Christmas markets and, man, I'm so excited. My husband's similar, it sounds like, to yours where he's not my husband yet. I just called him my husband. That was a weird moment.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did.
That's funny. My fiance is similar to your husband, it sounds like, where his first time on a plane was when we went to San Diego together last December. And we've done a lot of trips since then, and he's all about travel but hasn't done much. And so this will be his first time to Europe and my first time to those places. And so, yeah, we will have to in the future do some planning for that on this podcast. So
yes, yeah, definitely.
So excited. Yeah. Yay. Awesome. Good question.
Yeah. So thanks for telling us about your trip, Michelle. We're going to now move into the last segment of the podcast, which is called Wish You Were Here. During this part, each of the three of us is going to share a little travel snapshot of an attraction somewhere we've been, someplace that we think is cool from any of our travels. Think of it kind of like a little postcard that you'd say, wish you were here. It's this really cool thing, and just kind of share about that cool little attraction. So, Michelle, what would you like to share for your Wish You Were Here?
When I studied abroad and taught abroad in Morocco, I had the amazing opportunity to go to one of the local hamams, which is the public bathing houses. And I guess it's a wrong way of describing it as a wonderful opportunity because anybody could essentially walk in as long as you pay the fee. But since we had a guide and our professor, he told us about them because the place in which we were staying only had one shower. And of course, that was for the family and not for all of us teachers that were staying there. And what I love so much about it is it was a great way to see the community in Rabat, Morocco, and, just hang out with the locals and not just be in this hotel away from it all. And one part that was really fun
cool.
Was we get into the hammam, and of course there's the locker rooms and for you get prepared for it. And my male professor was unaware of the decorum, I guess you could say, in the female hammam because he had only gone into the male hammam. And so we had inquired and said, well, do we wear bathing suits? Like, what's the modesty expectations since the country is so modest to begin with? And, or certain areas of the country, I should rephrase. And he said, oh no, definitely wear your bathing suits. So sure enough, we walk into this bathing house with our bathing suits on, and we're the only ones covered. And we, I mean the other teachers and I. And it was funny because one of the women who was there, clearly with her family members, stares at us, just grabs her boobs and kind of just shakes them because there's, of course, a language barrier. So she was almost just kind of looking at us and being like, what are you doing? Like, we're all women here. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And so, of course, I was like, well, if you say so. And I just, followed suit. But it was just a great experience. And we ended up being there for like 2 hours because there's multiple rooms. There's like the hot room, the medium hot room, and then the cold room. You got 1 bucket of water. And then we ended up sharing our shampoos and our soaps with all the locals. And then they countered with giving us these essentially just bathing our backs with these like almost sandpaper scrapers. So I would go back in a second. I really just felt welcomed by the community, and I would take anyone back to a hammam in Rabat, Morocco.
Awesome. That's great.
Okay,
Cheryl, what's your
cool.
wish you were here?
So mine is a restaurant in LA called Perch. It is everything you want from your pretentious LA brunch, and I just insist that you go there.
Wait, what is a pretentious LA brunch?
Okay, just picture in a TV show where people are going to brunch, and you're like, that's not what brunch looks like. That's TV show brunch. But this is like that brunch. So It's on a rooftop in downtown LA. That's why it's called Perch. And it's like, just LA people around, which is it's just its own funny people watching for sure. But yeah, it's just there's some indoor seating and some outdoor seating, and it's like 2 levels and lots of greenery, and the indoor area is just this gorgeous room, and then the outdoor you get the view of the city, which is really fun. Super good menu, and I went there with friend of the show Beth, and we got this like breakfast skillet with this meat that was like falling apart and amazing, and eggs that were like, the food was so good, and we got good breakfast cocktails, and then like got this great view. And so I would say, downtown in LA like might be an area that you're going to anyway if you're visiting. It's near some museums and other things down there. And then but I would say you got to go live that LA lifestyle and go to Perch. Yep. How about you, Ryan?
So I've recently returned from Ireland, and so a lot of my wish you were here is going to be from Ireland here for a while because it's amazing, and I do wish you all were there because it's amazing. So the one that I'm going to talk about today is the Skilly Walk.
Sounds
not
fake,
Silly
okay.
Walk, Cheryl. It is not Monty
man!
Python. Yes,
That's
I
why
know.
it
I'm so
sounded
sorry.
fake.
Yep. It's the Skilly Walk, and it's in the town of Kinsale, which is kind of on the south, not all the way to the west, but like kind of in the south side of the island. And it's just this cool walk along the water that goes, and if you do the whole thing, it starts kind of back like up a little bit from the main town center, and you kind of walk up and around. You go past the Spaniard, which is a pub, and then you kind of walk down these hills, and you've got a view of the waterfront and the boats and everything, and then you just kind of walk along the coast with like the water and the rocks, and then eventually, if you go all the way, it'll take you to Charles Fort, which I believe I talked about in my Ireland episode.
I think you did. That sounds
I
familiar.
did. Yeah, it's kind of like a ruin. Yeah, because I talked about it's like Fort Casey a little bit, and so
Yes.
But you can walk all the way there and then kind of check out Charles Fort and then walk all the way back, and it was just an incredibly relaxing. It's mostly flat. It's paved most of the way, and then some of it's like through the town and stuff. And it's just a really cool way to just see the town, see the city, do some like people watching, see people walking their dogs, stuff like that, and just enjoy the waterfront, which I really, really like.
Nice. That sounds great. All right, guys, let's do it. Let's go to all those places. It's going to be a good day. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for being on our podcast. We loved having you.
Yes. Well, that is going to do it for this episode. If you would like to follow us on social media, you can do that. We are at Timwy Podcast, TMWY for Take Me With You Podcast, on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Hopefully we can get Michelle to share some pictures from Thailand with us. We'll post those on the account so that you can see some of the cool places that she got to visit.
You can also email us at timwepodcast@gmail.com and send us your travel questions, guest suggestions. We would love to hear from you.
You could call us at 406-763-8699. And if that's hard to remember, you can remember it this way, 406-POD-TIMWE. And you can even tell us if there's some cool things from the podcast. I was just talking to a listener today, and she was sharing how our Travel Tips podcast, she listened to it while she packed for her last trip, and it helped her pack less.
Aww.
So we would love to hear stories like that.
That's
yeah.
beautiful.
Shout out to Ingrid.
Hi,
Woo.
Ingrid.
Yeah. So we would love to hear from our listeners, good things, bad things, and all the above. Also, if you could rate and review us on whatever you're using to listen to this podcast, that would help other people be able to find the podcast more easily. Subscribe if you want to make sure you don't miss an episode, and share us on social media so that more people can hear the cool stories from our guests like Michelle.
As always, thank you to Beth Reed Miller for her awesome artwork. You can check out more of her artwork at Beth Is Something. And thank you to Erica Corbin for the use of her song Around the Globe. You can check out her music wherever music is sold or streamed.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode. So until next time, please remember to take me with you.
Take me with you.
Can we get a sailboat chasing down the sunset as we float round and round the globe? Salty air and balmy nights, guided only by the lights above.